All right. Well, it's 8 o'clock, and we want to welcome you to the 2023 Stormwater Awareness Week. In fact, this is our first workshop of the week, and we got a great week of free stormwater education planned for you all. In fact, there are 33 workshops this year. 30 of them are online, and we even have 3 that are going to be in person, one in the Seaside near in the Monterey Bay area, and then 2 here in Lodi. But we're hoping that you can join several of the workshops this week. And we have just some really high quality workshops being offered by industry experts in the stormwater field. And so this week, or today actually, we have some good workshops. This is our first one of the week, so I'm glad you could join us for this one. We're going to be talking about the new construction general permit, and that's certainly a hot topic these days. And then at 8:30, well, that'll be halfway through this one. There'll be one on a brand new BMP by Kai Pono Solutions. Now, if you miss any of the workshops, they're all being recorded. So you can even go back and watch that one, even if you're participating in this one. And then at 10 o'clock, we have our keynote, our first keynote of 2 that are being presented this week. Both keynotes are going to feature the State Water Board and Regional Water Board staff. And today, it's what to expect when you get inspected. And it's really kind of geared more towards industrial facilities, but the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Boards, Rich Mull and Lowell Cottle, will be featured in that one. And I got to hear a little bit of the practice dialogue, and they got some really good information they're going to present to you at 10 o'clock. And Aaron Ortiz with WGR will be hosting that one. So you won't want to miss that 10 o'clock one. Then at 11:30 is ion exchange and iron oxide media for heavy metals, emerging contaminants removal. It'll be, obviously on treatment for industrial facilities. And then this afternoon, we actually have 2 that are going to feature passive treatment, kind of a new area in the construction general permit. The first one is by Kyla Wood with Applied Polymer Solutions, and she's going to be presenting at 1 o'clock. And then Vincent Randolph with LSC Environmental Products will be at 3 o'clock. And then also at 1 o'clock is Robin Tolley with the Tolley Consulting Group is going to talk about QSD field boot camp. And we'll be talking about it this week about the new permit that QSDs are going to need to get in the field now. And that's going to be, she's going to be covering what QSDs need to know about their new field inspections. So that'll be a great workshop too. So I hope you can join some of these workshops. We have already, as of this morning, 2,860 registrants for this week's event. So that's great. And so how to communicate with us? Well, you can email us at any time through the Stormwater Awareness Week website, or you can also email me. Maybe Rebecca will put that into the chat so that you can see it. Also, you can text us or chat or use the chat during the talk. And then at the end of today's presentation, I'm hoping to have a few moments where we can take some questions from you all. Now, today's workshop, this first workshop of the week, is on the new construction general permit, and it's going to be the first part of 5, a series of 5. I'm going to do this at 8 a.m. each day this week. It's actually a part of a 6-hour talk. Yeah, if you do the math, it's 5 hours here on the Stormwater Awareness Week. We're going to have to kind of really pack in a lot of material this week, but it's part of a 6-hour talk I give on the construction general permit on the new 2022 CGP. And so we'll be doing that each day at 8 a.m. So I hope you can join for other ones. And like I said, if you miss one, we're recording these, so you can take advantage of that. All right. Well, great. So why don't we get into our presentation? And as I mentioned, this is going to be part 1 of a 5-part series. And today we're going to talk mostly about permitting the permit transition from the 2009 CGP to the 2022 CGP, and what's involved there. Now, since we're past September 1, we've experienced some of this already, but we'll talk about this transition period that's built in for projects that were covered under the 2009 permit, and what will happen with them for the next couple of years. And then we'll talk about other permitting scenarios and mechanisms today. Tomorrow, we'll talk about the role changes for QSPs and QSDs, and that's a significant area that changed in this permit. And we'll talk about now QSDs needing to go out and buy some work boots. They go out and visit those job sites. And then on Wednesday, this is where it gets very different from the 09 permit or the new monitoring requirements. In fact, what I'm going to try to do that day is put some side-by-side comparison of a storm, a real storm event that actually happened. And we're going to look at what you would do under the 09 permit and what would you do or will do under the 2022 permit. And so you'll be able to see how they differ. And what I tell everybody, in some ways, nothing changed. In fact, when you read the permit, it's like, oh, this didn't change. But in other ways, everything changed. And join us on Wednesday. I'll show you what I mean by that statement. Then Thursday, we'll talk about new BMPs and what's required. There's some new areas for BMPs that we'll talk about. And then on Friday, we'll wrap up the week with a discussion on total maximum daily loads. So that's kind of where we're going this week. Hopefully you can join us for that. Here's my credentials. I am a QSP, QSD, and I'm also a trainer of record through CASCA. I give the QSP, QSD classes, or I'm one of several trainers that do that. And so probably have had some of you in my classes in the past, so it's great to have you here. And okay, so a disclaimer. What we're doing this week is not the official training, all right? So there is an official training, okay? It's called the 2022 CGP Reissuance Review, and it's actually required, as we'll see here, of new QSPs and QSDs and existing QSP, QSDs. We'll cover that in just a moment here, but where to find more information or the official information about the 2022 CGP Reissuance Review, go to the California Stormwater Quality Association. On their website, they got some information about that, about whether you're a new QSP, QSD or an existing QSP, QSD or a self-certified QSP, QSD. Maybe you're a civil engineer or a professional engineer, I should say, or professional geologist. Then it will talk about how to approach this. And yes, even the self-certified QSP, QSDs are going to need to take this reissuance review. So go to the CASCA webpage. There's good information about it, and there's links to where you'll need to take your exam. Here's a slide I received from the Water Board a while back. Obviously, there's a typo here. The numbering's a little bit off, but this is the path for new QSPs and QSDs and what they'll need to do to become a QSP, QSD. So the first part, or maybe what I should say is one of the parts, because the Water Board has made it clear the order isn't as important as just making sure you get each of the pieces in place. But one of them is getting your underlying certification. And that's still some of the same things like the CPESC and the CPSWQ, the professional engineer, professional geologist, and we'll be talking actually about some of the changes that came to that. I think tomorrow actually we get into that a little bit more in our training. But you have to get that underlying certification in place, just as you did under the 09 permit. And then you need to take your 2 or 3 day class through the trainer of records through the California Stormwater Quality Association. So you sign up for a 2-day class of your QSP or a 3-day class of your QSD, and you go to the class, and then you need to take and pass the exam that goes along with that class, which is proctored through the Office of Water Programs. Now, and then you You need to pass that. And then the next part is to take the 2022 reissuance review. It's about 4 hours of video that you need to watch, and there are learning quizzes that go along with that. Now, the quiz is basically impossible to fail, because once you miss a question, and guess what, I missed a couple, but once you miss a question, it'll say, no, you want to try that one again, and they're all multiple choice, and lo and behold, the same question comes up, and you get a second try, and a third try, and a fourth try if necessary, and eventually you will pass that quiz. So it's not real onerous. It's more of a learning exercise to help you pass through, learn the information under the new permit. Okay, so that's for new QSPs and QSDs. For existing QSP, QSDs, it actually changed a little bit since this slide was issued. For existing QSPs and QSDs that are certified through the CASCA program, meaning that you took your exam on the Office of Water Programs, you just need to take the reissuance review before your QSP, QSD needs to be renewed. And so that's a 2-year cycle. For some of you, you maybe have just completed that, so you may have nearly 2 years to do it. Some of you, it may be coming up for renewal here very soon, so you'll need to do that sooner. Now, I highly recommend, if this is your field of practice, you really probably should do the reissuance review sooner than later, just so that you can learn this new permit. But officially, you don't have to do it right away. And even self-certified individuals do need to go through the reissuance review. The CASCA website will have more information about that and how to do that. Okay, so let's talk about today's training, or this week, what we're going to do at 8 a.m. each day this week. So number one, this training, as we just heard, is unofficial. It never happened, right? No, that's not what I mean. It's not, obviously, it's not the reissuance review. It's unofficial, but that gives us a little more freedom, because what we're going to do this week is we're going to add some commentary to it. We're going to talk about and be able to discuss some of the new features and even contemplate it. So we're a little more at liberty to discuss it than what they would be doing in the official reissuance review. Number two, this subject material is new and untested in practice. Now, we saw this in the 2009 permit. For those of you who are around back when that 09 permit first became effective, remember, like around 2010, that was a game changer year, as we'll talk about here in a little bit. And there were a lot of things we were scratching our heads on, like, how is this going to work out? And the industry just, made it work. We're kind of in the same boat in many ways right now. So some of the stuff we're going to talk about is like, okay, now how do we make this happen? And so we'll be needing to discuss that and figure it out. So subject material is new and largely, unpracticed. In fact, what we have now 3 weeks under our belt in this new permit. So I don't think anybody has a lot of experience with this new permit yet. Number three is interpretation of the permit requirements may be subjective and are definitely subjective. In fact, some of the keynotes on Wednesday, I will be interviewing the Water Board on the Wednesday's keynote on the new dewatering requirements, the attachment J requirements. And boy, there's been a lot of, how are we going to make this work? And you'll get to actually hear the Water Board and regional board staff comment about it and talk about how in their regions they're going to make this attachment J work. So anyways, that's a little bit to know about the flavor of this class. So again, we're going to go into the first part. And we're going to talk about the permit transition and changes in permitting. So a little bit of history here, timeline. Some of you may be have been along for the whole time, and others, maybe this is new to you, but little history, I do date back to 1992. I do remember having a paper copy of the first CGP in my hands. Of course it was paper. We didn't have electronic back then. And reading it and going, this is interesting. I wonder what this is all about. I remember thinking, maybe I'll dabble in this a little bit. And never in my wildest dreams would I thought that that decision would actually build my career. But yeah, and back then it was greater than 5 acres of soil disturbance is what made you get the permit. Now, and then in 1999, part of the phase 2 NPDES regulation changes that came out, it dropped that threshold down to 1 acre. And then, of course, as we were just mentioning, 2009 was a watershed year. That was a huge year. Big changes with the permits. Some of you probably remember some of those changes. What were some of those? Yeah, risk levels. Risk levels 1, 2, and 3 didn't exist before 2009. QSPs, QSDs, they didn't exist before 2009. Mandatory BMPs and REAPs, rain event action plans. Yeah, all sorts of new stuff. And you think our heads are spinning here in 2023? You should have been along for the ride back in 2009, 2010. And some of you probably remember that. It was quite a transition. But now we are talking about the new permit. Now, I'll probably refer to it as different things today. I may call it the new permit. I may call it the 2022 permit. And that might be the first question. Wait a minute, we're in 2023. It just became effective this month. How come you're calling it the 2022 permit? Well, it's because it was adopted last year. July of 2022 is when it was adopted. Therefore, it took on that nomenclature. But yes, it is being put into effect or went into effect September 1st of this month. So, yeah. Now, a little throwback to last year's Stormwater Awareness Week. Exactly 1 year ago, we did an interview with Brandon Rosenboom, who I'll be interviewing later this week. Brandon is the lead person with the State Water Resources Control Board for the construction general permit. He actually was responsible for much of the writing of that permit, and he's going to talk to us about the transition. Now, obviously, we are now beyond September 1st, so keep that in mind, but still a lot of this still applies. So let's listen to Brandon for a few moments.
Okay. That's correct. We went to the adoption meeting on September 8th, 2022, and the permit was adopted by the board members present. So unanimously by the board members present. And there was only 4 at the time. And so that means that we're kind of in the stage of the permit where before the effective date. The effective date is planned for September 1st, 2023. So roughly a year or so after it was adopted. And that means we're at the stage of the permit process that I like to call pre-implementation. And that kind of means it's the period where regulators and the regulated community have a chance to adapt to the new requirements.
And it's going to take some adapting for sure. There are some areas that didn't change a whole lot, but there are other areas that changed significantly, and we're going to be highlighting some of those this morning. So this adaptation period, I understand that we folks that are under the permit coverage right now, under the 2009 order, or what we might call the old permit, if they have an effective WDID number, they're going to stay under this for how long?
So for under the current permit, the 2022 permit contains a provision allowing existing dischargers to have what we call a regulatory transition period. And that regulatory transition period means that existing dischargers with their current WDIDs under the 2009 permit are allowed to continue coverage under the 2009 permit for up to 2 years after the effective date of the 2022 permit. So essentially, they will have until August 31st, 2025 to complete their projects. Otherwise, they will have to enroll by September 1st, 2025 in the 2022 permit.
Okay. So will they need to file a new notice of intent, or do they need to do anything different?
So their existing permits, their existing WDIDs under the 2009 permit will be administratively terminated. And then the discharger would have to refile a notice of intent with their updated documents that are compliant with the new requirements, and also certify that they are seeking to continue coverage under the construction general permit for an existing project.
But that's at or before September 1st, 2025, right?
Yes, so at or before. If the discharger was continuing coverage after their 2009 permit was terminated administratively, they would technically be out of compliance with, or they wouldn't have a permit that is regulating them, and therefore they would be out of compliance.
Okay, so but between now and next September 1, they don't really need to do anything, right? They are just going to be under the permit as they have been all along.
That is correct. And so once September 1st rolls around, any new project that's filed after that date would have to file under the 2022 permit. So folks that are still planning on submitting before September 1st, they'll have coverage under the 2009 permit.
Okay. Now, I noticed that, but recent changes, there were 2 hearings.
Okay, we'll stop there.
Could you tell me some of what was on there?
All right. So as you heard Brandon talk about, this is a transition period. So we had kind of 2 transition periods where we had up to September 1st, and a lot of people were getting their NOIs in at that time to get coverage under the 2009 permit. Now, why would they want to do that? Well, we did an analysis of that, and I guess it wouldn't be a surprise to most, but the compliance program is a little more onerous under the 2022 permit. There's some new requirements. Now, true, the water board backed off on some things like reefs, but we'll talk about on Wednesday how, even though the reefs are gone, still a lot of those requirements are still there. In fact, even maybe perhaps a little bit more onerous. So as we did an analysis of the 2 permits, we were coming up with basically, depending on what variables you have in your permitting program and at your particular site, a 10 to 30% increase in compliance costs. So there was this, we were telling all our clients as well as the industry, look, get your WDI or your notice of intent in before September 1st. And a lot of people did that. We have since had a few projects come through our company here that needed to be permit after that, and they are now obviously under the 2022 permit. So now we're in this second transition period where we're going to be, anybody who has been permitted under the 09 permit is going to stay under that permit until one of 2 things happen. They file a notice of termination and it gets approved, or August 31st, 2025 comes, whichever occurs first, that's when their permit coverage will end. But if the project is continuing past August 31st, 2025, as Brandon mentioned in that video, their permit coverage is going to be administratively terminated by the water board, and they're going to have to file for coverage under the 2022 permit. Now, I do suppose that you're going to be given plenty of notice, it probably months before we get to that point where these projects are being terminated. The LRPs and anyone associated with the project is going to get an email through SMART saying, hey, it's time. If you're going to do construction beyond August 31st, 2025, you're going to need to submit an NOI under the 2022 permit. So
I really believe there will be plenty of notice, plenty of communication to let you know that date is coming upon you. All right, so let's do a little bit of a side-by-side comparison. Now, I don't know if I can get it on my camera, but here's my permit, yeah. Basically, the first 2009 permit, well, my green screen's not working too good, but you'll notice that if you just look at the thickness of the two permits, the 2022 permit is a bit thicker than the 2009 permit. More volume, more content. Maybe the biggest addition is attachment H, dealing with total maximum daily loads. But if you look at the table of contents side by side, the 2022 actually seems a little more streamlined. So that's what I want to focus on a little bit here, is helping you navigate the new permit as compared to, you know, the one we're more familiar with, the 2009. So that first section where you see the Roman numerals, that's the section we call the order. And how did it get its name? Well, in the order after the findings, there's these 4 words that show up in bold. It is hereby ordered. That's where it gets its name. So you'll notice that it's a little bit shorter, the outline anyways, in the 2022 permit, but in reality, it's just because they streamlined some of the organization. But the order still does address things that are generally true of everybody in the permit, you know, like how to get permit coverage, the inspector qualifications, the QSP and the QSD qualifications, annual reports, how to terminate the permit. And so things that are generally true of everyone in the permit is what you'll find in the order. And of course, prohibitions and permit requirements, that type of thing. But then you get down into the meat and potatoes of the permit, and that's where we spent probably most of our time looking at. In the old permit, we got really familiar with attachment A as LUPs, you know, linear utility projects. And then attachment B was how to get your permit registration documents, how to get permit coverage. And attachment C, D, and E were risk level 1, 2, and 3 BMP requirements. Now notice that that's changed a bit on the 2022. Brought up from the bottom of the permit up to the top in these attachments, which is the glossary and acronyms and regional board contacts. And I guess that's the other thing is we now only have attachments, not attachments and appendices. And yeah, we got used to it, but I remember in the early days, it's like, why do we have attachments? Why appendices? What's the difference? But now they're all attachments. And then when we get to attachment D, that's where it combined the old attachments C, D, and E. So where attachment C would talk about risk level 1, attachment D, risk level 2, and E 3. You know, when I would do the QSP, QSD classes, we'd be going through these, and there was a lot of redundancy. In fact, most of BMPs were the same, with a few different ones for risk levels 2 and 3. Well, they streamlined that. Now it's all in attachment D, and the first section deals with all the BMPs that are common for everyone, and then this next section deals with things that are unique for risk levels 2 and 3. We'll actually go through that, I believe, on Thursday is the day we're going through the BMPs this week. And then attachment E is now the LUP section. So it basically moved from the A position to the E position. Attachment F is still active treatment systems. That's probably one of the few that did not change. And then the rest are new. Attachment G is passive treatment. And today we got 2 classes on that new requirement. You definitely want to check that out. Attachment H is on TMDLs. That'll be Friday's topic for this 5-part series. And then the ocean plan exception for discharges to areas of special biological significance. And then what I consider to be the most troubling part of the permit, you know, there's a lot of new things in the permit, but the one that causes me the most consternation or just wondering about is attachment J, dewatering requirements. In fact, that is the topic of our keynote on Wednesday, and I am really, really looking forward to hearing what Brandon with the State Water Board has to say. But then we're going to have four different regional boards weigh in on their interpretation of it. So you definitely want to check that out. And already in some of just our practice runs, I was hearing information like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. That's interesting. So yeah, definitely be a part of that on Wednesday at 10 o'clock. Okay, so so the old permit is now expired as far as anyone getting coverage under it. Now, projects will continue to be under that until, like I said, either they terminate or August 31st, 2025 comes around, whichever is first. They'll be under that. But now anybody applying for coverage these days on smarts is going to be under the 2022 permit. Plus additional acreage. If you add acreage to an existing project, you will also be under the 2022 permit. All right, let me just do a time check here. All right, so let's talk through some of the new permitting scenarios. We're not going to go through this in depth because a lot of it didn't change, and but I'm going to try to highlight the areas that did change. And one of them is now you need to show people you have permit coverage. In fact, take a look at this here in the order or Roman numeral 3A2 says an applicant is considered to have general permit regulatory coverage and commence construction activity upon receipt of a WDID. Okay, that didn't change. That's what's true and still is true. But this is new. Dischargers shall post their site-specific WDID number in a site location that is viewable to the public or readily available upon request if unable to post publicly. So basically, you're going to have a sign like you see in that picture saying, here's my WDID number. In fact, I've been working on our new SWIFT template for the 2022 permit. And one of my appendices is to actually have a blank form 11 by 17 that they can actually fill out. We'll probably even laminate it and give it to our clients so that they have something they can write on and put it up at the gate or on the job trailer or somewhere that's going to be viewable by the public. Now it says, yeah, unless you can't do it, it's hard for me to come up with a project where you couldn't do it. Now I know there are places I've had projects where the general public aren't even around to look at it. So maybe that would be one of the places, but I think it's pretty simple to drive in a stake and staple it to it and wherever you're at. So I'm not sure when it would not be possible, but that's a new requirement. Now, LUPs had some significant permitting changes, and it's a new concept, and I kind of say new. I guess it's officially new. That this actually started, I understand, during the 2009 permit that the State Water Board was giving some relief or some streamlining of the permitting process to LUPs even back then. But it's, I guess, codified or formalized here in this new permit, and that's called the programmatic permitting regulatory coverage. And there are two types that you need to be aware of. One is the regional, and then the second is the statewide. So let's talk about the regional first. And this is for LUP projects. So again, for those of you, most of you are probably familiar with LUPs. It's linear utility overhead or underground projects, right? So let's take a PG&E project, and maybe they're putting in a new high voltage transmission line, and they're putting in those big steel towers, brand new line they're putting in. And so this would be every single one of those projects or those footprints where that tower is going is going to have some soil disturbance. Now, it may be each one is greater than an acre when you add in all the staging areas and everything that goes with it, or it might be that it's not greater than an acre, but because it's part of a larger common plan of development, it needs permit coverage. And so you could imagine if you got dozens of these, 100 or more of these, that could be a real headache if you're having to permit every single one of these separately, a different NOI, a different SWIP for each one of these. So from what I understand, even during the 2009 permit, some of the utility companies approached the water board and said, can't we streamline this? How about one NOI, one SWIP, and we just let you know when we're going to do the construction. And so I understand that that was actually happening, but now it is officially here in the permit. Now there's some caveats. So the first thing is that project or those series of projects have to be located in one regional water board. And the other thing is, as you would probably expect, is they have to be all basically the same, very common construction activities. It basically cookie cutter, right? They got to be pretty much the same. And they have to have one legally responsible person. And of course, for LUP projects, that is the utility company. So as long as they're in one regional board and they're all basically the same projects, then they can submit one NOI and one SWIP for that. Now, we'll talk a little bit more after we cover the next type of a programmatic permitting coverage as far as notifications. So the second kind is statewide. And this is a part of the governor's order N7320, which came out in during COVID. And I don't know if you remember working from home, a lot of us did, and had kids from home. And, if you were in a place that had good internet coverage, that was great. But if you were in a place that didn't have good internet coverage, that was kind of a pain. And so the governor issued an executive order to streamline the process of getting high-speed internet to rural areas. And so governmental agencies were required to do their part. And so the water board, when they looked at this executive order, they're like, well, we got this programmatic permitting coverage deal. How about if we, just do that same thing for these broadband projects? And so they basically took the same idea, but instead of making it regional, they made it statewide. So you didn't have to be in one regional board like Central Valley or Bay Area or LA area. It could be statewide. And it still needed to be a group of similar projects and have the same LRP. Now, because of the urgency of this one aspect of the permit was actually allowed back in December of 2022. But obviously, we're well beyond that point now. And this is now an option for anyone that it would be applicable to this type of project. And that what they need to do is, if you are doing either the regional or the statewide programmatic permitting coverage, as you start projects, you then need to give notification that you are beginning those projects. And if you notice on Roman numeral 3B4C, it talks about that. It talks about linear underground and overhead projects discharges with programmatic permitting coverage shall submit prior to commencement of any construction activities a common SWIP, and that's number one. And then number two, well, we have a new acronym in the stormwater world, an LCAN, a linear construction activity notification, basically saying, okay, we're starting up at this site now. This site is now active, and that way the water board knows. So, and like traditional projects, LUP projects also have to post their WDID numbers. Okay, now for coverage under the previous permit, we talked about this already, so we won't spend a lot of time under this. But one of the things I mentioned is that if you're going to increase your acreage under the old permit, you can no longer do that now that we're in September 1st. And that if you're going to, let's say, go from 10 acres to 15 acres, this happens with subdivisions a lot. You know, we see subdivisions, you know, builders trade, you know, parcels or portions of the project and or take it on. And so let's say you had 10 acres you were building on under the 09 permit. Those 10 acres stay under the 09 permit. But now that we're past September 1st, and if you're going to take on additional acreage, it doesn't matter how much. It could be under an acre or it could be, you know, 5 or more. But if you're taking on additional acreage, now that portion is going to be under the 2022 permit. And essentially, you got 2 permitted projects is what you have. But everyone on the site's going to think of it as one project, right? And it'll get really confusing. It will get confusing, especially when we talk about the monitoring program and how it's going to look very different for 09 permits and 2022 permits. It's going to look quite different. So it's going to be something you're going to want to take a notice of if you are increasing acreage. You're really going to have to train everybody that this is actually now 2 distinct projects. One, the 10 acres in the 09, and all the new acreage is under the 2022. All right, now we probably still have some projects out there that were permitted. Basically, they got an erosivity waiver. Technically, it's not a permit, but they obtained a erosivity waiver from SMARTS for work that they're doing this dry season. And here in the Central Valley, you know, it's different in different places of the state, but here in the Central Valley, really, we can typically work under a waiver until the earliest, like mid-October, but in some places even till mid-November, you can work under a waiver. So as long as the R value is 5 or less and 5 acres or less, you can stay under that waiver. So what if you got a waiver last, you know, under the old permit? Well, nothing really changes. You continue under that waiver until it expires. Now, if everything went to plan and your project's terminated and stabilized and you've reached your expiration date of the waiver, good, you're all done. But if work is continuing, the schedule slipped, you need to now move forward, and now you're going to be going into December. Chances are your R value is now greater than 5 after you do your risk determination. You're now going to need to file for permit coverage under the 2022 permit. So keep that in mind with these waivers. All right. I will circle. I'll try to leave some time for questions at the end here. I see some in the chat. Okay, a new section of this permit, or a new portion of this permit is the notice of non-applicability. Now, it's new and it's not new. In the old permit, when there was a list that said projects that do not need permit coverage, and at the very bottom of the list, I think this was in the findings, it said basically if your discharge cannot reach waters of the U.S., then you need to consult with the regional board, and if they agree, then you're excluded from the permit. You're exempt from the permit. So it was there. Now it's kind of formalized. And if you're familiar with the industrial general permit, you'll recognize this term, notice of non-applicability, or the acronym is NONA. Now, so they've formalized the process a bit more. And so if you say there's no way, no how, discharge from our construction site is reaching waters of the U.S., WOTUS, right? Then you could claim that no discharge using a notice of non-applicability on SMARTS. Now, you have to meet one eligibility requirement, and that is to show and prove that the site's physical location is not hydrologically connected to waters of the U.S. And that is done through a technical report that gets uploaded by SMARTS, and it has to be signed by either a California licensed professional engineer or geologist who has hydrological expertise. So that professional does their evaluation, goes, yeah, no, there's no way, here we are, south of Fresno, and there's no way this water is reaching waters of the US. So then they would prepare that technical report and then upload that onto SMARTS. And then, of course, the water board can review that. Now, I've had projects, like next to the Feather River, and it was on cobbly material, and we never had a discharge. If even in a 2-inch storm, it all soaked into the ground. But being that we were right next to the Feather River on cobbly soils, I'm pretty confident that we were hydrologically connected. But that wouldn't be up to me. It'd be up to the professional to determine whether that is the case or not the case, and to demonstrate that in the technical report. So keep that in mind, these NONAs now. All right, modifying permit coverage. Let's talk about a few of these here. Some of this really didn't change. It's still the same process. If your new start date, new ending date, the process is really much the same through the change of information process on SMARTS, the COI. Now, one kind of new area or new requirement is Roman numeral 3F1B. Take a look at this. It says, if a discharger is revising the construction start date to a later date than previously submitted, then a COI shall contain time-stamped photo documentation depicting that the construction activities had not commenced for the entirety of the site. Now, I just had a project like this here recently, even where they, for whatever reason, they had permitted it a long time ago before COVID, and the project got shelved because of COVID. It stayed shelved until very recently, and now it's reactivated. Now, I would have never kept a project in limbo that long, because you're paying all these annual fees and having to do annual reports still, although they're not real difficult, but it's still more of a hassle. It probably would have been better to just file an NOT, say, no, we haven't started, and then do an NOI later. But that wasn't the case here. Now, the thing was, for this particular project, they had about an 18-month window where they could stay risk level 1. But because they waited so long, they now had, the time between the start time and the ending time was now much longer than that, and it caused that R value to go well over the point that would then kick them into risk level 2. So we had we were able to say, no, actually, we haven't started the project, and we changed the start date to keep it at the lower risk level. Now, if you're doing that under the new permit, you would have to provide photo documentation to say, yeah, see, no, project hasn't started. There's no construction here. So, that's a slightly new thing in the new permit here. All right, reduced acreage. We talked about increasing acreage, but these other COIs will not kick you into the new permit under the 2009. It's only the increased acreage. But reducing acreage needs to happen from time to time, especially home builders. They're always having to reduce acreage. Why? Well, they sell homes, right? And, they have completed lots, built homes, and they want, the new homeowner to move in as soon as possible. And so there's oftentimes that we need to reduce the footprint of our SWIP programs and our permit coverage. The permit really kind of says the same type of scenario. A little bit more information is going into our maps that we're doing, but it's roughly the same. However, for subdivisions and home lots, it does get a little bit more involved here. So let's take a look at this. Under Roman numeral 3F2B, it says, for a larger common plan of development for residential use, The discharger may, through the COI process, remove residential lots from permit coverage once the lot meets the following criteria. And let's look at these. Number one, the residential lot has been sold to individual homeowners for residential use. Okay, and then the second, a certificate of occupancy or equivalent document is maintained on site and can be made available during inspections. Okay, that's a kind of a new requirement. I don't see that as being a real problem because the home builders obviously would have that, but it is something that maybe that we need to keep track of and know where to get this. The lot has to be less than 1 acre, so this doesn't apply to large custom home lots. And then 4, all construction activity conducted by the discharger, key phrase there, by the discharger is complete. Now, why do I say key phrase there? Well, lots of times, if you've inspected subdivisions, you'll know this to be true. The moment the new owner buys it, they then start construction. Maybe the swimming pool, the patio, redoing the landscape, and that's usually when the site blows up. But you know, in that case, it's by the new owner, not by the discharger, not by the person who holds the WDID for that subdivision. And then the 5th requirement is that the discharger has temporarily stabilized any unfinished yard or landscaped areas. That's a new concession, temporarily stabilized. So those backyards, those side yards that maybe haven't been permanently landscaped need to have some sort of temporary stabilization in place. Going along that line, take a look at the next section. The discharger shall upload as an attachment to SMARTS documentation of a contract, such as CC&Rs, right? Or maybe a homeowners association agreement or something like that, requiring the individual homeowner to stabilize the yard and landscaping within 1 year and to maintain temporary BMPs until the yard and landscaping are stabilized. And you're of course required to keep general permit coverage in place until you show you have adequate termination there. So kind of a new area for subdivisions. Increased acreages, we already pretty much talked about this, but there is a new definition here I want to circle in on. This last one here under Roman numeral 3F4D says if the increased acreage is greater than 1/4 of a mile from the existing site boundary and is an acre or larger, the discharger is required to submit a separate NOI. We used to get that question asked a lot, so I'm kind of glad to see this in here, some definition, like, okay, yeah, we're doing it's part of a larger common plan of development, but you know, we're 2 blocks away. Can that be a part of the same SWIP? How about 3 blocks? How about 6 blocks? How about 8 blocks? You know, at what point was it? And so it's kind of nice now to have this definition in the permit here. And then change of ownership. This is also a slight change here. And this is going to keep projects at higher risk levels because now under the new permit, you can't reset the clock when you change ownership. It was one of our little tricks in the past. You know, a change of ownership is great. We can go back to risk level 1, or we can avoid going to risk level 3 with a change of ownership. Now, when you change ownership, the new NOI for the new owner has to reference that original start date with the original owner for that project, for that project that's started, you know, under different ownership. It's got to do that. So that's going to keep projects at a higher risk level for sure. All right. So I do have some questions here, and let me just do a check on time. I got about 6 minutes here. So let's take some of these questions here. Let me just scroll up our chat here. Adding acreage results into 2022 coverage. What about reducing acreage? Yes, you can, and we did cover that. And it's whether you're under the 2009 permit or you're under the 2022 permit, it really doesn't change things. You just have to follow that process through the change of information. But especially if you're under the 2009 permit, it's not going to change your permit status. For grandfathered projects, would filing a COI to increase construction duration result in needing the 2022 permit? No, it won't. As long as you're not going beyond August 31st, 2025. So let's say you are going to go beyond August 31st, 2025, then what you would want to do is increase it, your time up through August 31st, 2025, so that you have the longest time period under the 09 permit. And then if your project's going for another year beyond that, then you file a new NOI at that time when the water board says it's time to file, and you would then have one more year under the 2022 permit. So, but yeah. All right. Can we consider storm drain replacement projects as LUPs? No. Storm drain replacement projects would be considered traditional. Can one project can one project be pieced out based on, let me start this again. Can one project be pieced out based on drainage management areas where some are considered a NONA and get traditional coverage? That's a good question. I'm going to have to think about that one for a while. The answer might be obvious, but it's not coming to me at this moment. That's a good question, Jordan. You got to be careful with that part of a common plan of development phrase in the permits. That's a good question. I need to think about that. Plus, it might also have a lot to do with your particular circumstance. All right. Does the local or private entity must submit a COI when they enter into an agreement requiring a new contractor or a new phase of development like utility relocation under the local entity encroachment permit? Okay, well, COIs are used in different ways. So a COI is also used as a SWIP amendment. And so if you are amending your SWIP, then yes, but I don't think that's probably the intent of your question, Walter. Probably you're talking about a change of ownership or something like that. If you're changing ownership, then permits are not transferable. So somebody's got to do an NOT, the old owner, and then the new one's got to do a NOI. But COIs are used for changing the duration of the project, either the start date or the ending date. They're used for changing the size of the project, reduction or increases, and they're used for uploading your new SWIP, your amended SWIP. So that would be when a COI would be required. Next question, if a homeowner has discharge exceeding limits, who is responsible for that discharge? Okay, well, first off, we need to define a few things with that question is who's actually the legally responsible person, who actually holds the permit? Is it the homeowner when they're building their own home, or is it the builder that is doing it? So ultimately, the answer to that question is whoever has the permit coverage, whoever holds the permit coverage is the one. Now, I think you might be referencing the what we just talked about with subdivisions and about allowing temporary BMPs. Those, as long as they've met the criteria we covered, the homeowner is actually not a permit holder. So they would not be liable to the regional board because they don't hold a permit. Now, they do have the obligation to put in the BMPs within 1 year, or the permit stabilization within 1 year. And those of us in the industry have been kicking around, okay, well, what happens if that goes, you go beyond that? Yeah, what happens? We don't know. So I guess we'll find out. All right, I just noticed it's 9 o'clock. Thank you for joining our first workshop of Stormwater Awareness Week. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me. I do have a podcast that we put out that's on Apple and Spotify. It's called SWIP Radio. If you want to hear more dialogue about this permit, and while you're driving around, you can do that. Also, here's my contact information. If you want to take a quick screenshot or picture of that, you can before we log out. And send me an email. And we have a saying around here that advice is free over coffee. So I'm going to let you go because there's other workshops coming up here soon. So we'll see you soon.